And what we see in the history of drafts, not just in the United States, but in any country whatsoever, that when a draft is in full effect, the managers, generals, politicians, whoever's making such decisions, tend to lessen the value of the life of each of those soldiers because they know a replacement is easy to come by. Where in a voluntary situation, if they misuse or inappropriately use these military soldiers, the next person's unlikely to volunteer. So in a situation in China where they have, just millions of those soldiers being drafted, lining them up without guns and walking up a hill into machine gun fire is easy to do because the next guy is just a draftee as well, and you can easily replace them like this. In a voluntary situation, they have to be valued. Life has to have value. And generals, politicians have to treat those lives as value. And so, because I value life, and I want others to value life, I don't want to see a draft put in place. And again, we can come up with any scenario because I want generals and politicians or whoever's making those decisions about what the tactics should be to value each one of those soldiers' lives and know that even if they're sacrificed, it's of value in the sacrifice.
Well, I think you're right. The drafts are terrible.
Well, I agree too. And I think one way in which you can you would help make certain that we wouldn't jump into a draft, right, is if you had a situation where the draft really cut across all socioeconomic levels, including the people at the top who elect the people with Congress and fund the people who are in Congress. In other words, it's also easy to, in our current system, which is a voluntary army, it's also easy for Congress to send people off to fight in wars and battles around the world when, by and large, most of their family members aren't involved. A lot of them have family members involved. I'm not making an absolute argument here. But there's also, if you look at the socioeconomic backgrounds of soldiers in the voluntary army, it's not equally distributed across the social classes.
It's interesting, back in the day, you had knights.
Back in the day,
knights and kings, man. I'm old back. So back when I had, I had my own kingdom.
Yeah.
So it's interesting on Eric's point. I mean, the knights, where they had conscript their serfs, they had to go too. I mean, you can't just tell other people to go fight for you. The kings are out on the battlefield. I mean, can you imagine if Congress was conscripting people, has to physically be in the battle too? How often did we conscript people?
Never.
Well, how did we lose that? How did we lose that? Because that used to be the system. They would draft them, but they had to show up too. Anyone doing the drafting had to be on the battlefield. Yeah. We still would have been on that long. Congressman on the front lines.
Entertain any questions from the audience, or are we done?
Yes, we have some time left. Is there anyone here who has any questions for any of our panelists?
Or I'd more put it as counterpoints. You probably have better arguments than we do up here, so I think counterpoints are probably a better thing.
Well, on the draft notice, let's say that theoretically China invaded the United States with the express goal of conquest. And in a situation that's either draft or be conquered, or what would you say about that scenario?
I don't know how you know that you're going to be conquered without a draft. I submit that you would never have to face that calculation. I don't think the draft is the same as the way it was being conquered.
Well, in a hypothetical where things are starting to look really bad, there's a good chance to be conquered if there is no draft.
I feel like I have confidence in enough rednecks here in the United States.
Even in California,
not going to allow people. How many times has the U.S. been invaded? Our land's been. I mean, there's one. I've got that. World War II. I've got the War of 1812. Great Britain. Canadian regiments actually come down. So it's really Canadians. I don't know if you follow U.S. versus Canada. We're 0-2 versus Canada. Canadians burned D.C. during the War of 1812. We tried to invade Ottawa and take it over out of Canada. They rebuffed us. So say what you want about the Canadian peace lovers. Peace lovers, they're 2-0 against us.
That's good.
We lost that one too.
We did.
All right, any more questions?
Alright, so I know the answer for at least one of you who's had you advised and talked about this, but I want to see from the panel, recently, as far as the economy goes and the downturn in 08, trying to get things back on track, you've seen a split in different spheres of thought in how we should go about doing that. In that, should we further consumer spending and get consumers to spend money, and we got to get the economy back in the short term, or something in that we should focus more on a long-term savings investment, as the econ said, machines, tools, and factories. You have one side of improvement that says, hey, government spending, let's go, let's put some money behind this, and you have other sides that say, well, hold on, government actually crowds out, government spending crowds out private sector spending, and we need to slow that up. I want to see on the panel what we think the appropriate, role of government spending is in the macroeconomy.
It's Keynes versus Hayek again.
I know.
I left for a minute.
It's I mean, obviously, the kind of fundamental, it's a fundamental question about what we kind of the role of government in the economy. I think that I'll go ahead and take more of the Keynes perspective, since I would assume that my colleagues will not, right? So somebody ought to just say it, even if they think that's crazy. So, I mean, I think that kind of the argument, I think, in favor of government spending, I'm going to ignore kind of the economic principles to some degree, because my colleagues are much better educated in that issue than I am. I would defer to their judgment in many respects on that. I think that from a kind of a social welfare issue, right? I mean, I think that the cost of saying, I mean, I think one of the things that kind of always strikes me, and it's true in kind of the healthcare debates and some of these other things, is that the cost of saying, like, well, we need to let things kind of allow kind of market solutions, right, and kind of longer term goals, I think is admirable one, and I think it makes sense. I mean, I'm probably more favorable to still a capitalist kind of perspective than Eric is, but I think that there's what's lost in that discussion sometimes is that there is real human suffering that results, and I don't know if maybe it's just a kind of a guttural instinct for the government to try to solve that. I think my colleagues would suggest that my instincts are wrong, that my instincts against human suffering is good, but the government is the wrong mechanism to try to solve the problem. But I think that kind of my reaction to being favorable to some governments, especially on social welfare issues, which I understand is not kind of the capital investment you're speaking of, it is really the fact that right, the sacrifices that we have to make in the short term are, I think, for me personally, are hard to bear.
I'm not an economist, I think, and I don't have an ideological answer for this. I think mostly what I can offer is a warning. I think we have a tendency to sort of entrench ourselves as, I'm a Keynesian or I'm a Hayekian, and as if human nature is something that is also stable across all times and all cultures. And in a particular situation, I'd like to see us be a lot more pragmatic and a lot less ideological. Now, what that means in this particular instance, I mean, like I said, I'm not an economist. I read economists and I value them and their discipline. But I don't have a good answer for, I know, Krugman says we didn't throw enough money at it, right? There's reasons to doubt that some sort of government austerity is a wise path. It doesn't seem like the in-between has worked real well. So I don't have a good answer. I think, and I don't know what the future holds on that either.
Defer to Brian.
Jim, where you going last time?
I'll chime in on it. Well, first of all, just to throw a comment, it's proven I'm generally against it.
That's
So,
proven.
just throw that out there. But I mean, what often gets lost in this, there are political costs and economic costs. The economic cost is doing something. There are political costs to doing nothing. And people are always they're more willing, politicians are gonna be more willing to pay those economic costs than our political costs. And even if it sets us back, and even if it's a disaster for the economy, they're gonna do something. They're gonna do something because they won't get elected through nothing. That's the reason the Republicans lost with the FDR, because they were wanting to ride this depression out, and FDR said, no, the Democrats are going to do something. We can debate whether or not the New Deal brought us out of the Depression or extended it longer than it actually would have been, but the politicians will always do something, because politically they will not be punished for trying.
All right, so I'm the other economist on the panel, and I do agree with Eric here a little bit that the idea of taking some distinct philosophical bent without taking any practicality into the framework is inappropriate, to say the least. Where do I generally come down? That I generally come down on the sides of markets tend to work themselves out, and most types of crashes, 88 included, I could contribute back to distinct laws and policies that were put in place that actually led to them, not free market enterprises going into place. And so it's part of that crony capitalism actually that caused some of the problems. So asking some of the people that caused the problem to be the solvers of the same problems they just caused seems like you're asking for a double dose of trouble. That being said, while I generally think that the markets tend to work themselves out, I do think there is a role for government to encourage these types of activities. And so I think government can play a part in encouraging investment, encouraging the building of capital stocks and so forth. I do not think that government should be the ones that are increasing demand side, or what Keynes would refer to as increasing the animal spirits of individuals. So, in essence, I know I'm probably giving you a very similar answer to probably what Stroud gave you in class. I know you have. When you said it, I knew you were referring to it.
How much more debt can the United States absorb?
Well, we don't have to absorb it.
How much more debt? So, how much more debt can we put on the table?
Well, we can look at the Japanese. I mean, the Japanese have a debt ratio close to 200% of GDP. Is it like, oh, yeah, that's right. It's like 220,
But as the reserve currency, I mean,
yeah, 230% of their GDP. And that's clearly not sustainable in the long run. And so, yeah, and so, you know, is there room to grow for debt if that's what people want to do? Yep. Is there a cost to be had at some point? Well, I think we're going to see in places like Greece and, you know, Japan and others what that price is to be paid down the line before the United States will pay.
Remember
But
the
we tend to
Asian
go-
contagion?
Sure.
I think it's just as a practical person, as well, I acknowledge your offer saying, if we're going to spend money to fix something, just engaging just in government spending. That was going to be your fix. And I'm not suggesting that's a good fix, but if it were, what you do, you still want to build roads or parks or build schools with that money, right? I mean, then you have some tangible assets to be used by future generations. So yes, you're going to send them a debt bill, but you're going to give them something that's of tangible benefit to the human life. What we largely did with the stimulus in practice was increase transfer payments again. We extended unemployment insurance from 26 weeks out to 2 years, 2 weeks out to 2 years. So we paid people not to build roads, we paid people not to build schools, not build pathways and parks. And of course that doesn't solve a problem, and of course it doesn't put people back to work. So in fact, we wasted borrowed money to do that is just a double whammy. And so from a practical point of view, that was one of the reasons why our economy is taking so long to recover.
But why didn't we? I mean, there were all sorts of calls for infrastructure bills, and there were all sorts of plans about that. Why did we end up, and honestly, I'm asking differently, but I mean, why did, it seems strange to me that we ended up with a lot less of those public projects, you know, a sort of, sorry to say, New Deal sort of public investment, right? And instead, we just had the transfer payments. You know,
But maybe that was just another lie.
Well, I think there's not, I think that there's the political will for the transfer payments is quite strong. Right?
I think that's the
At
answer.
the end of the day, and I think that particularly, and obviously we don't want it to become a super kind of partisan issue, but I mean, you know, President Obama, when they build roads, put signs up that says built by the Democratic Party or whatever. It doesn't say that, right? But it may as well, right? Built by the Democratic Party. I mean, not to go too long, but I mean, the Republican Party does not want to see signs up saying the government's building these roads, right? I mean, there's a philosophical commitment for many Republicans. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it is a political loser because you don't see the transfer payments in the same way. There is a rational.
They could set up unemployment insurance, so it was the Democratic Party didn't want to extend unemployment insurance. Even today, the battle in the Senate is exactly the opposite.
And I don't mean to suggest that the Democratic Party has some philosophical. I mean, I think they have to be both. Right? I mean, I really, I mean, but I think that
both parties did sign on to the bill, so it is a good, interesting question.
Yeah.
Both are at fault for doing it. Right? I don't want to say one party was right.
Yeah, and I don't
think they're both right. You know, not to watch.
But I do think there is less political will for physical capital.
We put a sign on somebody's yard that the potential worker kept home by the day.
That's not one.
For another year and a half.
Question from the audience. Yes.
One of the panel members earlier said that, mentioned Social Security as being a Ponzi scheme. That's true. But essentially, the entire federal government, economically speaking, is a Ponzi scheme. I mean, we all know what happens with a Ponzi scheme. You start paying out more than you bring in, you've got to collapse. And that's the way that this country in general is headed. We're paying out obviously more than we're taking in with the debt. The percentage of the population that takes out of the treasury and puts nothing in is growing great. The percentage of the population that's putting in and not taking out is shrinking. And that's one of the, I'm a conservative, fairly right. One of the questions I've always had with Democrats, liberals, progressives, whatever, is if you're supporting a system that economically and mathematically speaking is doomed to fail, it's inevitable. It can't sustain itself.
Here's what I'm going to jump in on behalf of the liberals for a second. Is that there are, like any ideology, smart liberals and dumb liberals. There are smart progressives and dumb progressives. There are smart conservatives and dumb conservatives. Libertarians are all smart ones, but everyone else here are smart ones and dumb ones. Now, I'll give you an example. Norway, very big social safety net, you might consider it very liberal end of the spectrum. They pay their bills, they don't run up debt, they're responsible. Now, you know why they do it is they pull up all the used natural gas and oil out of the sea. Have no problem bringing it out, and then banking it. They provide health care for everyone in the bank money. So there are, in the world, at least, places where there are smarter liberals. There are places where there are smarter conservatives and others. Sometimes, I mean, an example of the dumb conservatives have been in the Stimulus Act and said, well, we should have a temporary tax cuts. Temporary tax cuts do not change people's behavior, and therefore we have no, in every study done on temporary tax cuts, do not stimulate the economy. Permanent changes in marginal tax rates do. The temporary tax cuts, like the reduction in the payroll tax, do nothing to stimulate the economy. So we had conservatives engaging in very dumb behavior. We had liberals who can sometimes engage in very dumb behavior too. But the question of unfunded of the Ponzi scheme. So the federal government's $17.5 trillion in debt. So yes, the federal government's a Ponzi scheme. So security by itself, an unfunded liability, is $19 trillion. So we've got a Ponzi scheme of government. Social Security, bigger Ponzi scheme. Unfunded liability in Medicare is about $68 trillion. These are all trillions, right? These are billions, it's all trillions. It's roughly $68 trillion. So the biggest Ponzi scheme of all is actually Medicare. And yes, you combine those all, we will exceed our debt fast.
And the last major expansion in Medicare was led by
Bush.
in other words, I don't disagree with your premise, but I guess I disagree with the fact that why do Democrats support a government that is like, I mean, I don't necessarily find conservatives in Congress to be that much more fiscally responsible than anybody else.
President Bush and the Republicans, when they had House and Senate, ran up debt. President Obama, when they had House and Senate, ran up debt. So you've got both parties running up debt.
Now where the disagreement is you know, how is that debt being incurred, and are those choices the ones that we would all agree to? That's where we start to part ways, right? So Republicans want to cut taxes, but they still want a big defense, for just a simplistic example. And, you know, well, Democrats aren't for that. They don't want to incur debt that way. They might want to incur debt some other way, but they're all going to incur debt. And that's why young people need to get involved. Because you'll pay the bill in the end.
A crisis is coming. And when a crisis comes, and the Vietnam War was a crisis, and young people stepped up and they said, we're not going to have any more of this, and they did many public demonstrations. For those of you that are old enough to remember that, you can read your history books. And they stepped up. Well, we've got a system that will fail, and a crisis will come. And it's probably going to be dependent on young people to step up and demand the kind of responsibility that we need. And only then are we going to get the politicians to follow, because they're just doing this all the time, right?
That's how Canada's tackled its debt problem. Canada had, back in the 80s, a worse debt problem by far than the United States. They actually got both major parties to buy in, both the Liberal Party, led by... No, it was the French guy. Anyway, the French-speaking dude says, oh man, you know, I'm a liberal. You know what, we're going to balance budgets. We cut social programs and go on working on balance budget. And they went over to the Conservative Party, and they happens to be an economist, said, yes, we should run budget surpluses. And they ran budget surpluses. Now their debt to GDP level is way below that in the United States. It's falling. They've got great economic progress. Their balance sheet is dramatically improved. They are really
Still
like
very healthy social safety net.
yeah, they do. And so, I mean, but they put pressure on both parties, right? They didn't rely on, there's a fiscal responsibility party and we'll blow everything debt on all this toys we want party, right? Nor were there two parties like the United States, well, we'll take on debt for our toys, but not your toys. Well, no, we want debt for our toys, but not your toys. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, honest to goodness, when she was not in the majority, said, during the early 2000s, we should have a pay-as-you-go scheme. The government should not be running up debt. And what she meant was they shouldn't have debt for their toys. Then she gets the power, she wants debt for her toys. And it drives me bananas. We need to put pressure on both political parties to say, knock off the debt for everybody's toys. You can't have stuff you can't afford.
Well, it's not just the parties, it's the citizens. I mean, there's two sides of the equation.
Right.
You know, this country was founded, if you want to boil it down to everything, was founded, in my opinion, on two tenets. Personal liberty and personal responsibility. We love the personal liberty, but we don't love the personal responsibility side of it.
That's right. We're only as good, the politicians are only as good as the people who are. No, that's why we're here. We're here to help. Well, Professor.
All right, well, thank you guys for coming out and watching this. I hope you all learned a lot. I'd also like to thank all of our professors who participated. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to our MC, Shelby, and we're going to hold the raffle, announce how much we raised for St. Jude's. And thank
Yeah,
you.
is this how the government works? Do I get a raffle ticket even though I didn't put money in?